Please rise for the reading of the scripture. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, and as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. And for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it, and from man. From his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of man. Together. And you, be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on the earth, and multiply in it. Amen. You may be seated. Okay, so I just want to give you a little warning concerning today's sermon. For many of you, some things we're going to cover today, it'll be the first time you hear anything like that. So at first, you might be repulsed by what is said at first. But maybe a month from now, 2 months from now, you might be taking a shower or taking a dump, and you get that sudden shower thought. Oh, I understand it. I get what the Bible's getting at. It's like a sudden moment thing. And when it happens, you say to yourself, how can such a small lie cause me to reject what is so massively and obviously true? So it's just a small warning for some of the things that we're going to cover today. So here's a side-by-side comparison of Genesis 1 passage and Genesis 2 passages. So this is Genesis 1. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And the parallel verses that we're talking about is in Noah's... That's from outside, right? Okay. Sounded like something from in there. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them... So that's the parallel passage. And then verse 28a, and God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. That's actually part of the second, but it needs to be included here. We'll see later. And then 1b from chapter 9, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So there's a parallel going on between Genesis 1 creation and then Genesis 9 recreation or the restoration. What I want you guys to notice here is, in Genesis 1, God creates man in his own image. And in the image of God, he created him. That's a singular him. One person, singular. Then God identifies the subgroup of that identified man, identified mankind. So there's a subgroup. And that subgroup is a plural, male and female. He created them. So that's a plural now. So man is singular. The male and female, that's plural. The flow of progression here is the definition of what man is first, then the subcategories that define what man is, into male and female. That's the progression that the Bible is using. So, did you guys watch that documentary by Matt Walsh called What is a Woman? I highly recommend that. It's free. You just go on Twitter or YouTube. It's for free. Or archive.org. Unfortunately, so I highly recommend it because he sort of tries to address it, and Matt Walsh is Catholic, so he tries to address the question of what is a woman. But unfortunately, Matt also drank the worldly Kool-Aid, and he defines a woman based primarily on biology. So just a little spoiler for that documentary, he asks his wife what a woman is, and the wife answers, it's an adult female. And most people might go, oh, well, that makes sense. Of course that's what a woman is. Of course a woman means adult female. But for people like me, I go, no, that doesn't make any sense at all. And the reason is, I'm going to ask what's an adult and what's a female. In other words, they're just kicking the can down the road, because if you go, what's a woman? And the answer is, it's an adult female. I go, well, what's an adult? How do you define adult and how do you define a female? So all it does is sort of push the question back. And another problem is, if the foundation for what a woman is based on what an adult is and what a female is, if that's the case, that creates a problem for not just what the woman is, but what a female is, because now you're trying to associate adult with female for whatever that definition of woman is. Does that make sense? Because you only have to define one word before. Now you have to define two words. It's a bigger problem. Does that make sense? Because before you only had to define one word, but now you have to define two words. And if you're trying to define two words, what's it going to be? 4 words? 10 words? It just keeps progressing. It's called a regression. So, and we'll talk more about this when we get to Abraham and Sarah, because that's when it really kicks in. This, what is a woman or what is a man? That's when it really kicks in. But just for now, a crash course on what is a woman and what is a man and what is a male and what is a female. Just a crash course. You might say a crash review, back from Genesis. So Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. Then the Lord formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature. That creature actually should say soul. That's how the traditional Bibles translate that. It became a living spirit or living soul. So according to Genesis 1:27, a man was made in God's image, right? And that image of God, right, created man in his own. Remember, this is singular, right? So go back to the next slide, please. And the Lord formed the dust from the ground. So Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 defines what a man is, which is God's image. And then this is constituting what that image looks like, which is being made from the dust of the ground and then breathed of God a breath of life, a living soul. And that spirit, that soul then reflect God's image as an image bearer, and is able to animate the body. Is able to cause something that's dead to move. That's how man is defined. You guys follow? That's how man is defined. So man cannot be defined apart from God's image. That's the point. So we can't. So the worldly Kool-Aid says you can define it from the biology first, and the Bible says no, you can't. You have to approach it from image of God first. So Genesis chapter 2, verses 21 through 23. And the Lord caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord had taken from the man he made into a woman and brought her to the man. And then the man said, "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." And remember, all the way back from the Genesis sermons, this is a brotherly language. So Adam isn't looking at Eve as his wife at this point. He's seeing her as his brethren right now, a sibling, because that's brother language, a sibling language. Bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. So the primary relationship between Adam and Eve was a sibling relationship, and then the secondary relationship is the husband and wife. You follow? One comes before the other. Okay. So what you have is you can't define a woman without defining a man first, because woman is what was taken out of man. So from the world, they try to approach it from biology. But from the Bible, you can't approach this unless you start talking about God first, and then something called the image of God that you get derived out of God first. So image of God, that's how you define man, and then woman is that which was taken out of man. A man is an image. I hope you can see that the worldly view of how to define these man, woman, male, female things are totally opposite when compared to how the Bible defines it. A man is an image bearer of God that was made from dead dust and given life. A woman is an image bearer of God that was taken out of man and made whole from a part of that living man. So man was made from the dead dust into a living being. A woman is something that's taken out of that living man, and that part was then made whole into another living being. So once you define man and woman first, then you can define male and female. A male is intended by God, meaning from the mind of God, God created male categories or male biological categories to express something in God's mind. What is that expression that God's trying to express in God's mind? It's to show by physical, biological expression that the woman was taken out of the man. That's how the male biology works. Hence, the whole male reproductive system hence the whole male reproductive system, where something goes out of you to give life. that make sense? Something goes out of you to give life. And the female, from the mind of God, has a biological expression, marker, that shows that she was made whole from a part of a man that came out of him. Hence, the female reproductive system, which is to take a part of man and then make it whole. So when you think about these things biblically, like you have man and woman, so in the world they go, sex is not the same thing as gender, and then this, that, and the other thing. Okay, but before we get anywhere, we need to define foundational terms first. You can't define man and woman through biology first, at least according to the Bible, because none of those have any meaning without the mind of God. You cannot define a male. Hence, it's not a coincidence that males have seeds go out of them for their reproductive system, while a female makes a whole part of a man that was taken out of the man for their reproductive system. So a male is something that goes out of him to express that the woman was made out of man. And then the woman is taking a part of man and then making that thing whole. So you cannot define a man or a woman, male or female, without first understanding that creation itself is meant to display God's holiness through order. And to grasp that order is to understand and grasp the mind of God behind the thing created. That's sort of like a long-winded way of saying what I'm about to show you here through pictures, because pictures are always easy to understand. Okay, so this is image of God. Okay, and then the image of God is looking at, what is that? Well, we don't know because it's just lines. Right now we don't know, it's just lines. Next slide. Light and senses. So there's light and senses that is coming out from the sun. It's causing us to be warm, and there's like light coming to our eyes. Next slide. We perceive that and we go, it's a sun. Next slide. And then God says, yes, I want you to see a sun. Which is why then you're able to understand the sun. So if you break down what's going on here, next slide please. Number one, in God's mind, he has this thing called the sun. And then he packages that sun mind into physical things, physical properties. Then that physical properties get carried over into our physical senses. Right? It's a package that's carried to our and is received by our senses. So the sun package is not received. But it's our mind that unpacks that sun package. It's our mind that does that. And understand that the sun from God's mind is that sun we're looking at. In other words, there's the mind of God, and then there's our mind. And it's this process how we understand God's mind. There's something that God has in his mind. He packages it in a certain way. And later on, this is going to be important because that's what Jesus Christ says when he says, in the Gospel of John, when it says Jesus Christ is the Word. It's something that packages what's normally incommunicable into a communicable thing, and then it's communicated, or it's packaged in a way where we can receive it, and then we can understand what's going on behind that thing that's packaged. So there's the mind of God behind the sun. That's the point. There's the mind of God behind creation. And then the mind of God created the world as his own revelation. He's revealing something through creation, and he's revealing his mind behind that. And then we receive that through these sensations that God packaged it into, and then our mind unpackages that. So you have to have a mind to understand a mind. You have to have an ordered mind to understand an ordered mind. That's the point. So you go, well, some people don't think that way. Next slide. You see it's X'd out there. Modernism says we can only perceive the senses, but we can know what's beyond that. In other words, the modernist will look at the chairs here and will say, yes, I can see the red. Yes, I can see the metal, the yellow color, but I don't know if that's a chair, is what the modernist says. Because it says you can't know a mind behind whatever it is. All you can know is the senses. And we're going to disprove this soon. Does that make sense? So the modernist says, yeah, we can perceive the physical things that are coming up, but we don't know the mind behind that. That's what the modernist says. And then the postmodernists go one step further. And he says, you can't even know what you're sensing. You can't know is what they're saying. You can't even know if you're perceiving those things by your senses. You can't even know that. So then you can understand if people think this way, man, woman, male, female, these have no meaning. which is why they say it's fluid. In other words, they're just throwing meaningless words around. It's meaningless because they don't agree that there's a mind behind that word. There's something being packaged to deliver that word somewhere. And then there's a way to unpack that, and then your mind receives that. They don't believe that. And now, like I said, when we get to Abraham and Sarah, we're going to talk more about this. But I'll prove more than demonstrably to you. I'll prove to you more than demonstrably how there's always something, there's always a mind behind a pattern or something organized or ordered. Next slide, please. Okay. What does this look like to you? All I see is like a line. Maybe these are raindrops. Maybe it's a graph, right? And maybe these are like plot points. I don't know. So the modernist would say that's nothing. That's just two lines and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 circles is what a modernist would say. The postmodernist would say we don't even know if those are circles because they're not completely round. And even if they were completely round, we can't be sure they're circles either. You guys understand? So people think this way. And we'll talk about why philosophically, like way down the road. Next slide, please. So then you go, oh, maybe I can put a plot point here. Maybe this is how the circles go. Now, when you see this, what do you see? What is this? Is it just 1, 2, 3, 4 lines with 8 circles? What is that? Now, if there's no mind behind it, this doesn't mean anything. You guys understand? But if I can make you guys laugh, that means there is a mind behind it. That's a giraffe walking past the window. Right? And some of you go, oh, it's so obvious now. It's so obvious. That's because there's a mind behind this drawing. My mind. And then through these physical things, it carried into your senses, and then your mind unpackaged it. So for a while, you didn't know what it was. But when I was able to explain to you what it was, your mind understood it. It grasped it. And that's proof that you guys have a mind. That's the point. You guys have a mind. And there was a mind behind these physical things that you're seeing. Again, we'll talk more about this more sometime down the road. The important thing that I want you guys to understand here is even as we talk about worldly things, we always have to come back to the foundation, which is the Bible. We have to talk these things in a biblical way. Otherwise, we drink the Kool-Aid of the world. And if we start to borrow their foundations, then we have no foundation. Because you always get into a regression. You always get into something, what's the foundation of that, and the foundation of that, and the foundation of that? You need to have a solid foundation first to work from to develop these things. And again, we'll talk more about this when we get to Abraham and Sarah. But to illustrate, the important point is about Eve. In Genesis chapter 9, I want you guys to take a look here and see something. Can we go back to that slide with Genesis chapter? Yeah. Oh, no, the previous one. The one right before, yes. I have a question for you guys. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. The parallel passage to that, and God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, something's missing. Do you guys see what's missing there? Male and female, he created them. But in the Noah case, Noah and his sons. So what's missing there? The wives. Where are the wives? Why aren't they explicitly mentioned? More importantly, if that's the first thing you might notice, more importantly, if it is a parallel, which it is, why is Eve being paralleled with Noah's sons? Kind of strange, isn't it? Wait. Pastor Tom, are you trying to say Eve is to Adam what Noah's son was to Noah? Yes, if you've been paying attention for the Genesis sermons. In Adam, the primary relationship is brotherhood, so that's the primary relationship. However, Eve represents the subcategories or the secondary relationships, and these secondary relationships are in this specific order of priority. Husband and wife first, then parent and child, then immediate siblings from the same father or mother, and then relatives. Eve represents all of this. Because if you remember, Eve was taken out of Adam. So in a sense, Eve is a child of Adam. That's what's being pointed out here. By pointing out Noah and his sons were blessed. And then male and female, God blessed them and said, both Adam and Eve. So in Eve, so from the beginning, there was a husband and wife relationship, a parent and child relationship, the immediate siblings from the same father or mother relationship, and then the relatives relationship. And what happens is these secondary relationships become irrelevant when we get into heaven. There's only one. The only relationship that exists in heaven is the primary relationship, the brotherhood within the covenant head. And since Eve represents these relationships towards and with Adam, the wives are not explicitly mentioned because in their husbands, their wives are already included. And this is going to be important because when we talk about Job later on, and God says to say, you can harm Job, but don't kill him. He says that to Job, and then his wife also survives, even though his children's all die. What's going on? It's because his wife is included with Job. We'll talk about that later. So when God is blessing Noah and his sons, their wives are also included with their respective husbands. So then you might go, well, what if they had daughters? What if Noah had daughters then? If Noah had daughters, they would be included in Noah. And they still wouldn't be mentioned explicitly because it's what the Bible's demonstrating here is there's a covenant head and then they're being included with Noah as their covenant head, unless they had their own husbands. And if Noah had a daughter or daughters and they had their own husbands, then Noah would be adopting those husbands as his own sons. So now they become adoptive sons. And this is all very, very important because later on when we talk about Jesus Christ and salvation, we become adopted sons of God. Adopted sons. And then we become heirs along with that covenant head. So in this case, it's Noah. So moreover, now you can understand what I said way back when, maybe like 7, 8 months ago, maybe even like 9 months ago, when we're talking about all this. And I was trying to tell you guys, Eve is primarily Adam's brotherhood, but then secondarily, his wife, and a type of child, a type of parent-child relationship in there. Because when I said that back then, everybody had this like surprised look. It's like, how is Eve a child of Adam? And I didn't want to go too deep in there because I know it's like something that everybody heard for like the first time, but Eve represents all those secondary relationships. Oh, and do you guys have any questions so far? Okay. Yeah, so back then you would have been like, what is Brother Tom smoking that he's saying these kind of things? But now you know. I'm not just saying it. I'm trying to show you from the beginning this was the case. And then it's slowly being revealed to us. It's being unpacked for us as the Bible progresses. So you see here God's covenant blessing then. So now here's the conclusion for it. God's covenant blessing was always meant to be from parent to child. Always meant to be. You guys see that? Always meant to be. So when God makes covenant, it's not only with that person. It's always with that person and their children because it was always meant to be that way. How do we know? Because from the beginning, Eve being a type of Adam's child, it was from Adam to Eve. And then from their to their progeny, to their children. So as we move on, Genesis chapter 1, verse 28b. So this is the second, So here's the second part of that. Subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So we just sort of like glossed over and said this just means to domesticate. And we never really talked about how to domesticate. This is how. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast on the earth and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea. Into your hands they are delivered. So many Christians think this is actually a declaration by God that God's going to instill a fear of the animals towards human beings. That's not what God is saying here. Do you guys see that? Because in Genesis 1, that's not what God is saying. God is commanding Adam and Eve to domesticate all animals. So in Genesis 9:2, God is commanding them, this is how you're supposed to respond to animals. And in fact, just to emphasize that God is talking about, when he says dominion, he's talking about like a total rule. The way we know that is that last part. It says, into your hand they are delivered. That's warfare language. This means that God is not, this is important because before sin, creation was not in enmity with man. Creation was not against man. There was a certain order that followed from God to Adam to creation. After sin, all of creation is fighting with man now. There's a warfare. And now what God is doing here in 9:2 is God is telling the image bearers, you have total dominion over the lives of the creatures. So lest you think I'm going overboard with this when I say this is warfare language. Or maybe I can express it a better way. So the last part of Genesis 2:2, God is saying, or 9:2, God is saying he gives his image bearers the full right and authority to kill any animal that opposed them, any creature that opposed them, excepting human beings. And we'll get to that some other time, but excepting human beings, every creature that opposes mankind, God gave the full right and the full authority to eliminate that threat. And it's using war. We know that because he's using warfare language. And lest you think I'm going overboard with this warfare language, let me show you how this last phrase in Genesis 9:2, how that works out in the rest of the Bible. Next slide. Oh, can you guys see that? That might be too small. Okay. This is Genesis chapter 14:20. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. Delivered your enemies into your hand. That's warfare language. Genesis 32:11. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother. This is Jacob versus Esau. Right? Esau is pursuing Jacob, and Jacob is like, I need to escape. So that's warfare language. Exodus 2:19. They said, an Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds and even drew water. Another sort of like attack language, victim language, or not victim, but like fighting against victimhood language. And I will bring a sword, this is Leviticus now. I will bring a sword upon you that you shall execute vengeance for the covenant, and if you gather within your cities, I will send pestilence among you, and you shall be delivered into the hand of the enemy. Right, so I hope you guys understand this is warfare language. And he even says deliver from the hand of God. So there's a warfare between God and sinners. Delivered out of the hand of the enemies. And this is from Samuel. So this is, I think, this is when they were fighting the Philistines. So going back to Genesis chapter 9:2, there's no other way to interpret this than warfare. Do you guys see that? Because everywhere delivered from your hands shows up in the Bible, it's a warfare language. So here's where it might upset some people. According to the Bible, there's no such thing as animal rights. Zero. You can turn it off. It's fine. There's no such thing as animal rights. All image bearers of God have rights because, as God's image bearers, despite being born sinners, we are made to image and display or manifest, reflect God's holiness, which is life itself. God's holiness is where life, eternal life, dwells. So therefore, by the fact that we're made in God's image, we have a right to life, which is the first right necessary for every other right. Why do we have right for free speech? Well, because we have a right to life. How can you speak unless you're living? Right? So you have this first right. That's if you're an image of God. Being made in God's image, by definition, means all image bearers have a right to life. And that's the first necessary right for every other right. According to Genesis chapter 9, verse 2, no animal has a right to life. Zero. Do you guys see that? If an animal opposes a human being, the human has full right and authority to eliminate it. Warfare against it. We'll pick up next time from here because we're going overboard. 3 minutes. Any questions? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so tree breathes, but by its breathing, does it reflect something about, you could say, does it reflect something about the Son of God through its breathing? The sonship of the second person. Does it somehow reflect that through its breathing? And the answer is no. So for instance, when it breathes oxygen, does it display somehow that it has a mind of its own and is able to, through its mind, able to make choices and decisions and give God glory based on those decisions? And the answer is, well, no. A tree doesn't have a mind. When we breathe, we actually have a choice to breathe for God's glory. And this is, Paul picks up on this later in his letters when it says, whether you eat or drink, do it all for God's glory. And that's because we have a mind. Because we have a spirit, because we have a soul, we have a mind. These are like interchangeable words, a mind, spirit, and a soul. So because we have these things, we're able to make a choice and say, we want to glorify God here. Or rebel against it and say, we don't want to give God glory. A tree doesn't have a mind. So its breathing is not the same kind of breathing as us. Biologically, it might be the same. So for instance, what about a dog, Pastor John? What about a cow? Don't they breathe the same way as we do? Well, biologically, they might. But if we approach it from biology first, we're always going to run into a regressive problem where we go, well, how do we define breathing then? How do we define how to tell the difference between the kind of breathing? Even if we get to like the air molecules, how do we talk about, how the DNA, causes the cells to become a certain way to make that into a breathable whatever it is? And all that's kind of like useless because it keeps regressing and regressing and regressing into more definite details and more minute details. And at the end, everything just becomes meaningless because there's no mind behind it. So from the Christian perspective, you first have to start with God's mind. And you try to think God's thoughts after God. So you start with God's mind, you think after God, and that's how we build our foundation first, where there is no regression, because God himself is the source of all things. So there's no regression, and then we start stacking God's revealed truths on top of truth, on top of truth, a little bit at a time, if that makes sense. So does that make sense? That's why we're not the same here. This breathing can't choose to glorify God, because it doesn't have a mind behind its breathing. Same with animals. Yes, animals can think to a certain degree, but it's all biological. There's no, yes, animals have a breathing spirit that animates them, but it's not the same as a soul, where there's a mind behind it and images God. It makes a choice to breathe for God's glory. It doesn't have that kind of a mind behind it. Whereas human beings, all human beings do. It's just that sinners, our choice is to rebel against that and say, well, I'm gonna breathe for my own glory. Today I'm gonna eat because I find this tasty and I'm going to eat it for my own glory. I'm going to drink that because it's tasty for my own glory. And not, I'm going to drink this for God's glory. I'm going to wear this for God's glory. Does that make sense? Oh, really? No. I thought there'd be a lot of questions about this one. Especially because of the animal rights one.
I got a question.
Yeah. Yes.
They're still created part of God. They're still created by God. So in other words, we still glorify God in there.
Yeah, in their respective ways, yes. Right.
And I don't know, when you're defining animal rights, I know animals don't have souls.
Right.
Because God did command us to take care of them.
Yes.
Some innate goodness of taking care of the animal. Instead of
yeah.
just eliminating just because it annoyed you.
Yeah, so not for the sake of annoying, but for the sake of warfare. So if at any point certain animals or whatever is putting the life of a human being in any kind of harm, so not just annoyance but harm, then the human being has the full right to eliminate that. And that's what this is getting at. It's a warfare language, and we don't want to lessen any of that. Right. We didn't get to that part yet, but because it actually mentions when we first read all the verses, it actually talked about human blood is going to be reckoned with, or God's going to hold accountable whatever causes human blood to spill. In other words, whatever caused harm to human, God's going to cause a accountability for that thing because man is made in God's image. So because mankind themselves are made in God's image, there's an exception, or you can say that's the foundational rule, and then the exceptions are the animals. And the animals are accepted from whatever is commanded towards man because they're not part of that category of image bearers. And we're going to see that next week. Just today we can only go so far. Yeah. And yeah, that's going to be important because, as you guys know, during the Mosaic times and during Joshua and then the First and Second Kings, God said, yeah, wipe out like an entire nation, wipe out these people entirely. There's actually a reason for that. And if we properly understand Noah's situation here, and then why God says God reckons all human beings, because they're made in God, why God requires, why God reckons responsibility and accountability for the harm of human beings, you're going to see like, it was actually God's judgment. So we'll get there, but it's like God is using people as flood instead of the water as flood at that time.
Just one. So when you say animal rights, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a broad term, and there's many different thoughts behind when you say animal rights.
Mm-hmm.
But if I feel just like as a personal perspective, if you say mistreat animals,
Mm-hmm.
or if you put animal over a human being's life, or if you put animal idolize animal, I think that's more. I understood that way when you say animal rights, because if you say animal rights, there's so many other things in this world
Right.
that can be misinterpreted. That like you're kind of you're putting them down
Mhm.
in a way that what they're doing is not a recognizable, or what they're doing is a wrong thing. But if you say if you mistreat animal, or if you put them above God, or if you idolize them, that's what you're referring to, right? When you say
No, that's not. Yeah, so that's why I said from here, because it might be like the first time you ever hear it. But animals have zero rights. So, like if you throw a rock from one place to another, right? A rock can't say, "Why didn't you leave me alone here?" Cannot say that. Animals have the same kind of rights as rocks. They don't have like a different, super, not quite right, but it actually is right. They don't have that kind. They don't have those kind of things. These are all created, and they're supposed to be used for God's glory. And in the Old Testament time, the way you glorified God by animals is to sacrifice them, because they have no rights. They're properties, and that's where animals are categorized in the Bible is. And the reason why it's categorized there is, in heaven, there's no animals.
So animal, you mean they are our property? God gave us
Yeah. So
them and take care of them, and not in like a humanly way, but dominion over.
yeah. So, and we're going to talk about this when we get to the Mosaic laws. But let's say you find an animal in the wild. The reason why you don't have any quote unquote right to just torture it and stuff is because that animal doesn't belong to you. It has no you don't have ownership of it, so you don't have any rights over that animal because it's in the wild. And we'll get to that when we get to the Mosaic laws. But well, what if you do own it? You actually have the right to torture it. You have the right to torture it because you're the owner of it. But if you look through how God commands us to treat our property, it's for God's glory. And that's the reason why the torture thing is. And you go, well, what is torture? Well, so here's an example of how we might not think it's torture, but in God's mind, it's a sin because we're mistreating our stewardship over God's things. They go, well, this dog is gay. This dog is a sodomite. It's a homosexual. So we try to, dress it up in this, gay parade and all this stuff, and, try to make it as gay as possible, whatever it is. That's not the purpose of those animals that God created them for. You're misusing that, and therefore you are torturing it. We wouldn't think it's torturing, but God considers torturing because that's not what they were created for. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I don't want to give you the impression that because things like dogs and cows, because they're so similar to our biological physique, if they get stabbed, they squeal and stuff, So we might think, oh, that's torture, but that's not the way God looks at animals. And we'll talk about this, like I said, we'll talk about more of this when we get to Leviticus, the Mosaic laws. But the reason why animals are so, you can say, close to our biological, physical, properties, God wants us to show us what it's like when we don't have the Spirit in us. In other words, we're nothing but beast if we're not image of God. That's the point of it. And unfortunately, our sinful minds misinterpret that, and it tries to apply human rights and human worth to animals. And animals don't have any human worth. They only have animal worth, creation worth. And in the Old Testament times, and we'll get to this 2 weeks from now, which is it okay to eat dogs? We'll get to that because they don't have any human rights. They only have animal rights, but not the same kind of animal rights that we're talking about. It's creation, things that God gave us stewardship over, and we're supposed to use that kind of stewardship over it, not,
If you put it over like that,
yeah.
you said just animal right. That's it, like very simple. That when you said that,
Yeah, so animals have no right to life. That's the first thing I want to emphasize is you need to have any other rights, you need a first right to life. And then I'm not going to get political, so you can discuss whatever it is about abortion you believe in, but all human beings have a first right to life. Whether they're maimed or not, they have that first right. And then every other right comes from that. Animals don't have that at all. Like none. In fact, they so don't have it. If it's the will of God to eliminate the entire world of animals just to save one sinner, God would do that. And I can prove that from scriptures. Because God is willing to send his only son to save one sinner. Animals are not in the same category. Yeah. Does that make sense? Okay. These are good questions because some people are I just found out some people are watching these. Okay, no way. Yeah, in that case, we'll take offering and then prayer.